There's been a lot of movement, Kurt, in the MLB. We had the trade deadline, and I know this is pro basketball talk, but we have to mention this. I mean, Juan Soto going to the Padres for 6 players and a lot of young talent there to join Fernando Tatis Jr. and Manny Machado. I can't even, I can't help but draw the parallels to the NBA. We saw that Rudy Gobert trade seems similar. We're looking at another blockbuster trade. Kevin Durant, perhaps, who forced his way out, would command something like that of a massive pirate ship worth of a haul, just like Soto did. The target, it looks like, once again, this is all coulda, woulda, might have, maybe, rumors. But the Celtics, and get this, Kurt, they might be willing to part with Jaylen Brown.
Yeah. Is
this a good idea?
First off, I think what makes the Soto thing so wild is he's 23, right? 23, 25?
23.
23, right? Who's that good, that young, that becomes available, right? Like, there's not many people that good, but like, that becomes available to be signed is kind of, it's different than Durant in that sense that as good as Durant is, he's 34. And it's part of why I think Boston, in fact, I'll ask you, Corey, because I think this is the core central debate of putting Jaylen Brown in this deal. If you put Jaylen Brown in, if it's Jaylen, which let's just say it's the first offer they made, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, a pick or two, a couple of first-round picks. If you're Boston, you put that in. If you get that trade, you become not just the favorite, you become the heavy favorite, right? Now you've got Tatum, you've got Smart, you've got Robert Williams, all these guys, good bench. You add Durant to that. Durant, I think, is an upgrade right now today over what Brown can do in terms of scoring. But your window is now, 2 years, maybe 3 with that group, and you are going to be the team to beat, but for a couple of years. Whereas, Corey, would you prefer having Brown, who you came up with, the fans have this emotional attachment with, and look, you made the finals last year, and your window with Brown and Tatum is 5 years, 7 years?
Maybe if you can keep them together. That's the thing, is the paycheck. And that is like, this is the race against time in Boston, because who knows, maybe they're like the Warriors and willing to get into that luxury tax and be able to keep that core together for a decade plus. I mean, it's doable. We've seen it happen in San Antonio too. They had Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili for forever, right? So you can do it. You can do it. Will the Celtics be willing to do it? That's another option. That's another discussion. And I think the thing that blows my mind here is that we just watched this movie. Like, we just watched it. Kevin Durant left the Warriors to go, be 7-11 with Kyrie Irving in Brooklyn, and then they get James Harden. And what happened, though, when they got James Harden, they completely depleted their, Jared Allen had to leave. All the pieces around them that made Brooklyn very competitive to become that championship competitor all left. Then Joe Harris got injured. And then it was you got 3 superstars and no one else. And that was one thing that we saw. It's like, man, this Brooklyn went from having one of the best benches in the league to then scrambling and trying to find Patty Mills and trying to wait for Joe Harris to get back. And then the 3 people couldn't hold them together. Then James Harden forced his way out, and that was that. So for the Celtics to revisit this concept and destroy what is one of the deepest teams in the NBA and this young talent, where in my mind Jaylen Brown is kind of like the emotional leader of that group, because I think Jason Tatum is like the alpha, but I think he's still a little young as far as being able to set the tone like a Steph Curry does. Like we go as Steph Curry goes. Like, I don't know if Jason Tatum is there yet just as a leader, because he's like what? He's like in his early 20s. he's like 5, So it takes a long time to get there. But for some reason, Jaylen Brown has this maturity that I've always admired, that I just it seems like they go as he goes, and Marcus Smart, right? Those 2 guys. But I think Marcus Smart might be number 1, but Jaylen's, I think, 2. For them to get rid of him to do exactly what happened in Brooklyn with the same cast of characters, I think would be a massive mistake. And especially if they get rid of Derek White, I think it's going to be a repeat. You're actually getting weaker there. So in my mind, hold off, keep the course. You're getting close. You're right there.
Look, and they got better this offseason. I think the other thing is that Boston brought in Malcolm Brogdon, who solved some of their secondary shot creation issues and depth off the bench and some of the stuff that kind of came up as they got tired in the playoffs. They bring in Danilo Gallinari, who is going to help them a lot in the regular season. How much he helps them, we can debate how much he helps them second round of the playoffs and beyond. But 6'10" guy who can shoot.
Like remember, like Bielka for the Warriors. You know,
Yeah,
the same kind of
no. I'm with you. I don't think I would do this. If it was just Brown and White in the pick, I'd have to think about it because Durant. And I'll tell you, when you talk to coaches and GMs, they lean towards win now. They kind of like, well, yeah, but you get Kevin Durant, you probably get a title in the next 2 years. I'll take that over what might happen in the future. And I'm not there. I think this team is so good and so close that I'm with you. I wouldn't break it up, but I don't think it's, look, if they're asking for, the rumor is that the Nets wanted Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart and picks. And at that point, I think when you get into Marcus Smart, you start really messing with the defensive culture of that team, right? Like and some of their identity in a way that Brown starts to mess with, but two of them, Brown and Smart.
That's like the whole Boston Celtics team that I think at the current moment, as far as culture-wise, you can't touch Marcus Smart at all. And then, like I said, Jaylen Brown, to think that you would be willing to part with him, I think on one side it's business. I understand that, and he is, like, if you're talking about a high-level disposable piece, like Jason Tatum is your guy. He's the franchise. Yeah. You can't get rid of him. But if you had to think who's expendable at a high-level player, like all-star, it would be Jaylen Brown. But I don't think that's a good message you want to send to young people in this league right now, where everyone's forcing themselves. They're signing max deals and then forcing themselves out. Like Kevin Durant just signed he just signed the contract extension. He just signed the contract extension, and then now he requested trade. So my point is that even if you thought your window was 2 or 3 years, that's not true. It's just not true, because we've seen this happen over and over and over again, where Toronto probably thought their window with Kawhi Leonard was pretty long, with Pascal Siakam and all of them, and Fred VanVleet. Next thing you know, he's out. You know, Houston probably thought so. Like, it's the same kind of question over and over again we're seeing in the league is, we had a nice window until someone signs a massive deal and forces their way out.
And I think Toronto was a little more wide-eyed as to what might happen with Kawhi, and they were willing to take that risk. I think that's the concern with not only Brooklyn, but like if your other teams that get mentioned, Toronto gets mentioned in Kevin Durant sweepstakes, and New Orleans gets mentioned in a Brandon Ingram thing. You have to ask yourself, you have to look at what happened in Golden State. You have to look at what happened now in Brooklyn and see those two situations in Brooklyn where they bent over backwards for him and say, hey, if they can't keep him happy, if he's there a couple of years and wants out, what are we going to do? Like, what's different? Like, I can make a great on-the-court basketball case for New Orleans if you want to, but if he's not going to be happy, what's the point?
Yeah, I think we're talking about, this is like the meta aspect. I think the fans are starting to see, I think, just how precarious and fickle professional sports are in that ego sense. And this is where I think the NBA has clearly gone over into opera theater. I don't know if you've seen The Red Shoes, it's one of my favorite movies, but Boris Lermontov, when you're the proprietor or impresario, when you're the managing director of one of those big theaters or Broadway or anything like that, the diva might just not want to go on 20 minutes before show. And your job is just to assuage egos. You have some of the most talented people on planet Earth, and your job is to tell the diva you're the star, go on and do the show. But then the choreographer is throwing a fit, and then you got to go do that, and then hey, on the phone, and the understudy didn't show up, and then it's hey, you come from the stands, then you get your big break. This is what we're seeing. Basketball has become a streetwear opera in that sense. And I think it's funny because the money is so big, plus this 24/7 news cycle in the off season where we're looking at videos of LeBron dunking with his kids at a practice facility. That's news now, what people are wearing at fashion shows, Karl Anthony Towns at Paris Fashion Week, that's news. Who's dating who, that's news. All these things combined, mixed in with this idea that you sign a quarter of a billion dollar contract every 5 years, means that we're into the era of divas. But what that means too is, as a team, you got to realize, what can a diva do for you? And I think that is a really essential question. If you want to be I always say, a Las Vegas residency, if you want to be Broadway and just say, hey, this A-list movie star who, regardless of the quality of team, is going to sell it. That's the definition of a movie star. Regardless of the quality of the movie, you will still make a profit. So when you think about movie stars in the NBA, it's like LeBron James. It doesn't matter how good the team is. Like if he's on the team, you're turning a profit because home away, people are going to buy the jerseys. They're going to show up. You're still going to be on TV. There's only like 5, maybe 10 guys, maybe in the entire NBA that hit that movie star box office draw. So if you want to go after one of them, and your job is like you're thinking profit lines and you're thinking that way, go for it. But if you're thinking about winning a championship, what can a diva do for you? And this is my last point on this. I know it's kind of a long, diatribe, but it's important, I think, because like Steph Curry is a perfect example. Tim Duncan, a perfect example. Those guys define the culture, and it doesn't matter you add or subtract around them. The culture doesn't get affected. Same thing with Steph Curry, but with Kevin Durant, I don't think he's that. And we saw that in Brooklyn. And then with Boston, Jason Tatum isn't there yet. So if you're going to get rid of everybody and just expect Jason Tatum and Kevin Durant to be that, that's like what we saw Kyrie Irving, who wasn't that, and Kevin Durant, who wasn't that. It's going to be the same type of thing. You need a Steph Curry because Steph can win without Kevin Durant. And he can win with Kevin Durant.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought those two guys up because that was the thing I'd been thinking was that you need a guy setting the culture who wants to be coached and who will hold people accountable. Tim Duncan may have been the ultimate with that willingness to be coached hard by Popovich, and because he would, then everybody else was going to fall in line. I think it's much the same way with Curry, even though it's a looser vibe maybe than a Popovich era team in Golden State. Like, the same accountability is there, and Draymond's more the voice, but Curry sets that tone. You're right. Some of these guys don't set that tone the same way, or you can set a Kobe Bryant-like tone, but not everybody's going to be comfortable playing in that, right? Like that's a different vibe, and it's some guys are going to thrive in it, and some guys aren't. It's kind of fascinating. I think I'm with you. The other reason I think every one of these teams looking at a Kevin Durant trade, and you talk about Jaylen Brown, every time I start to think, I'm like, maybe I do that. I'm like, 25 for 34. Trade a 25-year-old for a 34-year-old. And I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I know. And the thing about the whole movie star box office draw, too, is that, like I said, there's only a handful, maybe 5 or 10. The crazy thing about this, Kurt, is that those pillars that you're talking about, like the Tim Duncan type of pillars, Steph Curry type of pillars, there's only like 2 or 3, like in the league. So that's what's even crazier about this. So if you are thinking as a team, that is just it's like, I think from Boston's perspective, don't look at the shiny object, stay focused and keep going.